Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into President Trump's recent moves on tariffs, especially that very public spat with Walmart.
Yeah, it's moving fast, this whole
It
situation.
really is. So our goal here is to give you a quick, clear rundown, what's happening, why it matters for the U.S., for the global economy, and what different folks are saying.
hmm And we've pulled sources from, well, all over Yahoo Finance, Reuters, Bloomberg, CNN, Financial Times.
All from the last few days, too. So
Yeah.
this is really fresh information we're working with.
Exactly. And what's interesting, I think, is how this specific thing, the president calling out one big retailer, actually, uh, opens up these much bigger questions.
Right, about the economy, global trade dynamics.
The whole 9 yards.
We'll try and pull those key threads together for you, make sense of it all.
Okay, so let's jump right in with the headline grabber. Trump telling Walmart to eat the tariffs.
Yeah, that social media post was direct. Very direct. He said, and I'm quoting here, Walmart should stop trying to blame tariffs, eat the tariffs, and not charge valued customers anything.
Hmm.
I mean, that's pretty unambiguous.
It is. And Walmart, they responded pretty quickly. They basically said, look, we always try for low prices, but
But the magnitude of the tariffs, as they put it.
exactly. That and their narrow retail margins. They're saying they might just have to raise some prices.
Which they'd kind of warned about earlier, right? When they skipped their Q2 profit guidance.
They did. They cited the tariff uncertainty then. So, this wasn't completely out of the blue from their side. For companies like Walmart, it's all about volume.
Thin margins, high volume.
Right. So when the cost of the goods goes up because of tariffs, those thin margins can just disappear. Makes it really tough to absorb the whole hit.
So Walmart's basically saying, these are too big, we can't just swallow them. But then you had Treasury Secretary Bessent chiming in.
Yeah, he had a different perspective. He called Walmart's warnings a worst-case scenario, said he'd even talked to their CEO.
And he tried to shift focus a bit, didn't he? Mentioned falling gas prices being more relevant for consumers.
He did, trying to offer a counter-narrative, maybe suggest the price impact won't be as bad as Walmart's making out. He also said Walmart will be absorbing some. Some may get passed on.
Which is quite different from Trump's eat all of it demand. It's more like sharing the pain.
Definitely. And Besson also brought up inflation under the previous administration.
Oh, right. Saying, I don't blame consumers for being skittish after what happened to them for years under Biden. Sort of framing current worries in that context.
Yeah, it's interesting framing. But what this all really boils down to, I think, is this fundamental disagreement. Who actually pays for tariffs?
Is it the importer, like Walmart, and maybe then the consumer? Or is it the foreign exporter, like China?
Exactly. It's not just a Twitter fight. It's about a core economic tension in trade policy.
Okay, so that brings us to the broader picture. How is all this hitting the economy, and crucially hitting you, the consumer? The latest numbers. Well, they're not great.
No, consumer sentiment took a nosedive. It's down to the second lowest reading ever recorded.
And the really striking part, almost three-quarters, 75% of people in that survey just brought up tariffs themselves, unprompted.
Yeah, the survey director said, uncertainty over trade policy continues to dominate consumers' thinking. That's huge.
75% mentioning it without being asked. That really tells you how much this is cutting through, how worried people are.
It signals real anxiety, doesn't it? Directly linked to trade policy. And we're seeing hints of it in spending, too. Retail sales slowed down in April.
After that surge in March, right. Which was probably people buying before prices went up.
Likely, yeah. Pre-tariff buying.
And now we're seeing lists of things likely to get hit. Hardest electronics, toys, vacuums, even things like baby strollers and car seats.
Everyday stuff, not luxury goods for most people.
And there was that KPMG survey, too, showing people are actually changing their spending habits now.
Right, delaying purchases because of this tariff uncertainty, trying not to take on more debt. It suggests the impact goes beyond just immediate price hikes.
So, okay, consumers are worried, maybe changing behavior. What about businesses? How are they reacting?
Well, Bloomberg had a piece saying all this global economic uncertainty, mostly because of tariffs, it's overshadowing corporate earnings, even when Q1 earnings were actually better than expected for many.
Right, I saw that quote. This earnings season wasn't about the numbers, it was about the narrative.
That sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? Companies are looking ahead, and the narrative is uncertain, worrying.
And we see specific examples like Deere & Co. lowering their profit outlook.
Yeah, they explicitly cited tariffs hitting both their sales and their costs. That's a major manufacturer feeling the direct impact.
And it's not just the giants. That Yahoo Finance survey found 2/3 of small businesses are feeling negative effects.
That story about the Houston company, Rubber Track Wholesale.
Yeah, the owner saying sales are down since Trump took office, and now it's just about survival, not growth, because of tariff costs. His quote was stark. It's just survival.
It really highlights how smaller businesses often have less cushion, less ability to absorb these kinds of shocks.
And then you have Birkenstock just coming out and saying it. Prices are going up.
Explicitly. To offset the existing 10% tariff and warning it could go higher, their CFO said, "We will be fully offsetting the effects." No ambiguity there.
But interestingly, Walmart stock actually rose despite their warnings. How does that work?
Well, the thinking seems to be that their grocery business is less affected and their sheer size gives them bargaining power with suppliers.
So they might be better positioned to weather the storm than others.
Potentially, yeah. It shows how uneven the impact can be even within the same retail sector. Creates a kind of uneven playing field.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the global stage. The U.S.-China situation, specifically that 90-day tariff truce.
Right, the pause. But even with the pause, analysts seem to think the tariffs aren't going away completely.
No, the expectation is they'll likely stay around 30% even after this truce ends, maybe through late 2025.
That's what one report quoted analysts saying, yeah, likely hold at 30% through late 2025. So it feels more like a temporary pause than a resolution. The underlying tensions are still there.
And China seems to feel 90 days isn't really long enough anyway.
Their state media suggested that, yeah. Hoping for longer-term cooperation, saying the window should be far beyond a mere 90-day period, shows different expectations, maybe.
But for small businesses caught in the middle, even this pause, it sounds like it's still tough.
Very tough. One business owner called it a huge nightmare because the rates are still high, and 90 days is just not enough time to get new orders placed and delivered.
I saw that quote, the hydraulics company owner saying, "I thought I was going to lose an arm and a leg, and today I found out I'm only losing 2 fingers."
Oof. Yeah, that captures the limited relief, doesn't it?
And now there's this export rush from China. Businesses scrambling to ship stuff during the pause.
Apparently so, trying to make the most of the window. Meanwhile, the U.S. has paused some of its own export curbs on those dual-use goods.
Goods with civilian and military uses. Always tricky.
Very tricky. And it's already getting complicated. China's now accusing the U.S. of abusing export controls over Huawei AI chips. Shows how fragile this whole truce might be.
And it's definitely not just about China, is it? The U.S. is juggling trade talks everywhere.
Everywhere. And the reactions are really varied. Look at Canada.
Yeah, that sense that the old relationship is just over. Because of tariffs and sovereignty worries. Carney's quote was pretty blunt.
The old relationship is over. Yeah. It suggests a real fracturing of how things used to work. Countries are maneuvering differently now.
More targeted deals, maybe? Less broad agreement.
Seems like it. The EU is prepping a new proposal for the U.S., but they admit talks are slow. They seem confident their size gives them leverage, though.
And the UK has a deal, but the lower tariffs aren't kicking in yet, so still uncertainty there.
Right. Japan's pushing hard for zero-car tariffs. South Korea wants an exemption, aiming for July, but warning they might miss it.
Even Cambodia's in talks, trying to lower that huge 49% tariff on their textiles and footwear.
It really shows the specific pressure points for different economies, doesn't it? Cars for Japan, textiles for Cambodia.
Absolutely. And then India reportedly offering zero tariffs on U.S. goods.
Well, Trump was apparently discouraging Apple from expanding production there. It's complex.
And companies are adapting too, like Shein planning that huge warehouse in Vietnam.
Classic hedging strategy, right? Diversifying away from China to lessen the tariff risk. Shows how supply chains might be shifting long term.
And just to add another layer, Trump said the U.S. will set tariff rates for partners soon, basically saying they can't negotiate with 150 countries at once.
Which sounds, well, unilateral. Could definitely strain relationships further if the U.S. just dictates terms.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the Fed and inflation. Fed Vice Chair Jefferson was pretty clear.
Yeah, he said sustained tariffs will likely mean at least a temporary rise in inflation, interrupting progress on getting inflation down.
Which seems to contradict the administration's line trying to downplay inflation risks from tariffs. Puts the Fed in a tricky spot.
It does. And right on cue, Trump renewed his criticism of Fed Chair Powell.
Calling for rate cuts sooner rather than later, and that too late Powell will probably blow it again line.
Exactly. While Treasury Secretary Bessent is downplaying the Moody's downgrade of U.S. debt. So you've got these contrasting messages flying around about monetary policy. Risk adds more uncertainty.
And we're seeing real-world industry impacts too, right? Like the Halloween goods makers in China.
Yeah, mixed feelings about the truce because high tariffs already caused production delays for them.
But the U.S. scrap copper market is seeing a bit of a boost.
Because they can ship to China again during the pause. But then there's the worry Europe becomes a dumping ground for cheap Chinese goods diverted from the U.S.
And that prediction about a lost year for the U.S. housing market, that sounds serious.
It does. The Economist cited tariffs hitting building materials, plus labor shortages from immigration policy, saying builders just won't want to build in that environment.
Wow. That shows how these things can ripple out, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Housing impacts so much else in the economy.
definitely. So, if we try and wrap this up, there's this clear tension, isn't there?
Yeah, the administration using tariffs strategically versus businesses really worried about costs, consumers, the whole economic picture.
And this China truce feels pretty fragile, pretty temporary, plus all these ongoing, complicated talks with other countries.
The viewpoints are just miles apart sometimes. The administration saying absorb it or China pays, and businesses saying we can't, prices will rise, it'll hurt the economy.
And for you listening, trying to make sense of it all, well, it's complex. These recent moves could have real consequences for different industries and ultimately for your wallet.
Which leaves us with a big question for you to think about. With all these pressures, the temporary deals, the ongoing friction, what are the long-term changes we might see? How might global trade and supply chains fundamentally shift because of all this?
And maybe think beyond just tariffs, too. What other factors, interest rates, consumer confidence, global events, what else do you think will really shape prices and economic growth over the next year or so?